Hey there. If you've been enjoying the Unchained Binge Podcast, you should know that this podcast, like everything else we do here at the Escape Collective, is member-funded. That means we're funded by, well, you, if you're already a member. And if you're not, we hope you'll think about becoming one. You can head on over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up and become part of a pretty awesome community. It's a community that supports this podcast and the others on the Escape Collective Podcast Network, as well as everything that we write about bikes and more over on the escapecollective.com website. It's also a community with a very active Discord channel where we sometimes do live recordings of podcasts, by the way. In other words, there are lots of reasons to sign up. Our monthly memberships start at $11.99 USD, or you can save 30% by signing up annually. We'd love to have you as a member. And again, you can head over to escapecollective.com/join to find out more and sign up.
This is the Unchained Binge Podcast. I'm Kaylee Fretz, and we are going to go deep on Netflix's new Tour de France docuseries, Unchained. Today is episode 6, Plan B. In today's episode, we watch one of the world's best bike racers be inexplicably bad at bike racing. We learn that one of the world's best sprinters can't remember his shoes, or unfortunately, when there is still a breakaway up the road. And we debate whether there was any real drama inside Jumbo-Visma. Let's get to it. Joining me today, we've got the same crew as episode 5. Welcome back, Abby.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
And Johnny Long, reclined as ever.
Relaxed and thankful for being here.
And Kit, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Where should we kick off today? This episode introduces us to Alpecin de Koninck, kind of an up-and-coming team, home to one of the best riders on the planet. It also gets into this sort of conflict, real or imagined, between Wout van Aert and his needs and desires, and Jonas Vingegaard and the yellow jersey that he wants to win. Where should we kick off?
Let's start with the real elephant in the room, which is a nickname we never knew existed until this series came out. Is this just our ignorance as English-speaking press who don't necessarily cover Jasper Philipsen in all his now revealed glory? But were you aware? Were you aware that his nickname was Jasper Disaster? I feel I read enough Het Nieuwsblad to surely have been aware of that.
This feels like an internal team nickname, and it's not really nice. It's he's not like the sprinting stallion or like something sort of related to a skill set or a talent. It's more like he forgets his shoes on a regular basis, and so therefore it's called Jasper Disaster Philipsen. I didn't know it existed. No. I would be interested to talk with like some of the riders that he raced with back when he was sort of coming through the ranks, like at Hagens-Berman, for example, at Action Hagens-Berman, where he raced in, I think it was 2018, kind of on his way into the upper echelons of the sport, and whether he has been this way the whole time. I mean, clearly it's a personality trait deep enough for them to have mentioned it numerous times in a relatively short episode in which vast swaths of information are just completely left out. And yet it was determined that this was something that we needed to focus on, like 3 or 4 different times it came up in this episode.
My favourite part about it was Christoph Rudhoft's dripping derision of the whole thing.
Yeah.
He was just so done with it. So, we've got to get rid of this nickname. We have no room for it.
I took that as we have to get rid of him forgetting his shoes. Mm-hmm. Like he needs to stop forgetting his shoes so that we can stop calling him Jasper Disaster.
But he also needs to stop drawing attention to it. Stop drawing attention to the idea that he's this whirling dervish.
Well, regardless, it's a bit sad for him.
Like he probably forgot his shoes one time, and that's been his nickname ever since.
Yeah, Mathieu van der Poel said he's off and off in his own little world, or what did he say? He lives in his own in his own world, which kind of indicates to me maybe it happens more than once. That he is a bit forgetful, and he's a bit of a dreamer. I don't know. It endeared me to him, and they were who we saw were ganging up on him.
But ganging up on him in kind of an endearing way, like with the exception of Rudhoff, to his sort of general, one of the two brothers that are the GMs of the team. Everybody else seemed to find it kind of endearing. Like yeah, he's Jasper. That's just who he is. He forgets his shoes. He lives in his own little world. I did find it endearing, and I also, for me, it was a good reminder that often the way that these riders are sort of portrayed, frankly, by us in the media, because we don't generally actually know them that well, is not always the best reflection of who these people are as people, right? Because we view them in an athletic context. Like, by the time we are talking to Jasper Philipsen, his shoes have been found, and we don't ever hear about that bit. We're just we're post stage that he's either won or lost, right? Like, that's the things that we were talking about. And for me, it was like, we need to go back to one of the old kind of standbys in sort of pro racing bike media was like the at-home visit, and it doesn't happen enough anymore. And I actually genuinely think like this is the sort of thing that you might find out. You might go visit a rider, do like kind of a long interview, do a whole sit down thing, do a big profile, and in the process, one of their buddies tells you their actual nickname and explains why. And that's the sort of like good stuff that you could get from these kind of reporting trips. And I want to bring them back. I would like to bring back the at-home visit for this reason alone.
I feel like before this episode and before getting to know Jasper Disaster a little bit, I've always just thought of him as like the other guy on Alpecin-Deceuninck, because they have Mathieu van der Poel, who they got into a little bit in this episode. Which bizarre decision from pretty much all parts, in my opinion. But yeah, I've never like really known that much about Jasper Philipsen, and he's always been like the backup to Van der Poel on this team. So I liked getting to know him. I feel like he's one of my favorites now. I love a guy who forgets his shoes. Like, that's hilarious.
There was also the great bit, which I'm sure will become a meme as soon as we figure out how to screenshot scenes in Netflix without it just delivering a black screen. So if anyone could explain that to me, that'd be helpful. But it's when he's like laughing about something he said, and then the caption was chuckles self-consciously, which I really enjoyed, and I feel like that could just be used all the time for everyone.
What's interesting to me about the Philipsen and Mathieu van der Poel of it all, though, and the very heavy emphasis they put on having to select from a small team, because they are a small team apparently, which they're not really. They weren't even last year really a particularly small team, and they had Tim Merlier who they left at home, and they chose Jasper Philipsen. I know he was leaving the team, and that was a big part of the drama, but Tim Merlier was a stage-winning, he's one of the best sprinters in the world, and Philipsen came in the top 3 on 6 occasions in 2021. So that, as soon as they started waxing lyrical about how Mathieu van der Poel was the only one who could win stages, I thought, there's a guy on your bus who's probably got more chances on paper than Mathieu van der Poel does. Yeah, sure, he wins them in more interesting ways, and when he takes opportunities to get there, but this guy can win bunch sprints, and there are more of those.
The one thing I never saw coming was Kit campaigning on behalf or against Tim Merlier erasure, and I just really like that. That's
It's not necessarily that. It's just that this is part of one of my problems with this episode, which I'm afraid you'll hear a lot of, is that there were, and you've already mentioned it, that there were loads of bits that were left out, and this is, and they just really, really hammed up the back foot that Alpecin-Deceuninck are on, and they were never that. Even before Mathieu van der Poel dropped out, sure, they wanted him to win stages, and they wanted, for some reason, him to show that he could do the Giro and the Tour successfully. But I found it very tedious that they were trying to tell this story when it's so clearly not true to anyone who knows the sport and watched the race.
Well, and they do kind of provide the context where the team like exists with like around and because of Mathieu van der Poel, and like how they're trying to make like build it out into a bigger thing. But you know, it's like it's overselling the underdog story again, because the hardest thing to acquire in cycling is a rider of Van der Poel's caliber, and that is such a huge head start. Even if you don't have like 30 top riders like in Ineos or someone, or Jumbo-Visma, like having a Van der Poel, I think if you had to decide between the two, you'd probably go with Van der Poel, right? Rather than having like, if you had to choose between Ineos or Van der Poel, if you're starting a team from scratch, I think it's pretty level. I don't know. Maybe I think you go Van der Poel.
Can we talk about the Van der Poel storyline? So this would be a storyline that was absolutely aimed at people who already knew who he was, right? Because that sort of like him not performing only matters if you know how unusual that was. And I know that they kind of set it up by saying that he was one of the best in the world, but unless you kind of like truly have seen him race at the peak of his powers and seen him just absolutely dominate entire pelotons full of professionals, I don't think that the sort of opening scenes of him being terrible and falling off the back and all the rest, I don't think those mean much. So I thought that was an interesting inclusion, first and foremost. It felt a little bit, like more kind of tilted toward the cycling fan than the very casual fan. There's also a couple like weird moments in that whole thing. So, did any of you stop for a second when he was like trying to get into a hotel room?
Oh my god, it was my favorite moment.
Couldn't get into a hotel room.
The sad sushi picnic.
It was so good.
So I'm mostly what I'm referencing is the fact that Mathieu van der Poel was charged in Australia at the World Championships for apparently some like young women were like sort of knocking on his door and running away, and he like chased them into their room
the night before the World Championships. That's why he was so frustrated. Yeah.
I think the charges have all been dropped, or so they've been figured out in some way. But this is a big deal last fall, and I just like, again, of all the shots to include, like you have to assume that in a 39-minute episode, whatever this is, like every single shot is pretty carefully selected to do something. Right. And I couldn't help but think, like, is this some sort of weird, like, wink and a nod toward all the people that know what's about to happen, like 3 months later? It was just a very strange. It was weird. It was weird.
It was also just a funny image, though.
It was a very funny image, but like,
it was good.
So there's a clip at the beginning of it of him like trying to get into the door. They didn't actually need. He could have just been having a picnic, like in a hotel hallway. Anyway, I just found the whole thing, given the sort of context around Van der Poel and what we know happens later, the whole thing was just, I couldn't tell if it was like some editor just having a giggle at the whole thing.
I think it's also just because like some people will label him as he won't like play up to the media. Like his quotes and interviews are always fairly dry. Like because he's such a big star, he kind of doesn't want to encourage any more sort of attention to his orbit. So maybe that was the one moment of all of the filming where he actually just showed a bit of proper humanity of not being able to get into a hotel room. But the other thing, when you're talking about having already needing pre-existing knowledge of Van der Poel, is if you're watching this for the first time, have no idea who he is, do you know if he is a sprinter, if he's a climber? Do you know like what he's just introduced as a guy on the tour who can't get into a hotel room. And that's pretty much it. And he knows a bit about Jasper Philipsen. Like if you'd watched it as like not having known anything, you'd be like, Jasper Philipsen, he's the guy. Van der Poel's like this wacky side character brought along for the ride.
That is true, and it's weird.
I mean, you have to wonder like what the team was thinking, knowing that Netflix was going to film this year of the Tour de France and sending Van der Poel to the Giro before the Tour, and he's not like a seasoned. He's very, very, very good, but he's still like relatively young when it comes to that kind of load. I mean, it's not. I don't know. I was very curious about why that would have been a decision that was made, and I guess it worked out because they did the spin with Philipsen, but yeah.
What about when Van der Poel was shown training and retching into a gutter on the side of the road? Was that there to like show people like, yeah, being a pro cyclist is not glamorous. Like, yeah, you maybe like pop in champagne in like a budget hotel, French hotel, but you will also be just in a gutter with like a Belgian man patting your back.
He was doing a test, and well, you have to go as hard as you can possibly go.
Right. Well, on the line about like I've never seen anyone do efforts like he has, I think is an interesting one, because it's kind of pushing back on this notion. Again, you have to understand the context around Van der Poel and how ridiculously talented he is, that like he's a rider that can skate by on talent. It is very, very much in opposition to that idea that he is out here like literally puking on the side of the road. Okay, so moving on for Van der Poel, because frankly, he didn't really do anything in this Tour de France, and the only reason he was included is because he is Mathieu Van der Poel, which again, if you don't know who that is, probably made no sense. And the character was not developed particularly well, or I should say like sufficiently. They didn't dedicate that much time to him. It was more about Philipsen, and Philipsen's kind of like quest for this stage win. Which also then brings in Wout van Aert, who we will get into later in the episode, talking about Wout and Jonas. So that was a kind of a nice bridge between these two kind of bits of the narrative. And of course, kind of early in the episode, we get Philipsen's celebration for second place, which was a highly embarrassing moment. I will say that the show did a very good job of increasing my empathy for Jasper Philipsen in that moment. Because last summer, watching that happen, you're just like, how did he not know? Like, how? I mean, literally, he can see Wout van Aert. It's not like you finished like minutes in front of him. It's like on the straight, if you looked ahead, you could see him up there. So how did he know? And so I to be perfectly honest, didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for Jasper Philipsen. But then you see him like talking to his partner and just kind of devastated, and more than anything, embarrassed. And I think embarrassment is one of those emotions that is really sort of, it hits all of us because we've all felt it sometime. I liked that bit because I do feel like it in terms of sort of like getting me to engage with the character, I think that was particularly effective.
Yeah, when he says they're all going to laugh at me, I was just like, oh mate.
And we did. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
There was a fair amount of laughing that was happening in the press room, for better or for worse.
Yeah, we're all human. We've all been embarrassed.
Yeah.
It was great though. Like when we saw everyone, like that's why they had all those boom mics running after people, like in the aftermath of the stages, and it was like sort of an Alan Partridge-esque moment where he's like running away with his wife, and it's like, oh, don't worry, like no one really even saw it, to be honest. And it's like, no, we kind of did, but I guess what else do you say in that situation?
Yeah, that was rough. Like I said, I liked it from like a character development perspective, but I did not like it because it made me uncomfortable. Having to watch it again made me uncomfortable.
But probably, it's the same with like when Roglic lost the Tour, and other characters where there's like a fall from grace, like riders when there's a fall from grace or hardship, and then they come back. It makes you like them, and Jasper Philipsen will have so many more fans now after this portrayal. So I mean, well, yes, it was embarrassing. Short term, bad for Jasper. Long term, best thing maybe to ever happen to Jasper Philipsen outside of actually winning bike races.
I mean, I think it warrants mention that on average, I would say that the Alpecin de Koenig team has significantly above average hair. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think it's something because Alpecin have been sort of they've been around cycling for a while and used to sponsor the Katusha team, and before that the Giant team, which is now Sunweb. No, not what are they now?
DSM.
Anyway,
it's changed
DSM.
Today as well.
It changed today again. But there does seem to be a theme that every time there is like the star rider has a really good thick head of hair on them. Your Marcel Kittels, don't know, can't think of literally anyone else at the minute. But then with Alpecin de Koenig, literally all of them, the Rudhoff brothers, who must be into their 40s and 50s, magnificent mains. So maybe it's like a sort of tie-in deal where they're all just like dunked in it every day.
Just for anybody not aware, that Alpecin, one of the co-sponsors, makes shampoo.
Caffeine shampoo that is German engineering for your hair, and supposedly, well, I mean, if they are using it, then it's working. I guess that's the whole point. I'm learning about advertising in real time here. The other thing to say, just before we move on from that stage where Phillipson celebrated early, was we got a bit of sort of, it's not like direct revenge, but when Phillipson was questioning Wout van Aert's attack and how he managed to stay away, and I wrote down, he called Wout van Aert's attack impossible and it's not normal, which if you remember when there was the Jumbo-Visma documentary when Pogačar won the Tour de France from Roglic, they included a lot of stuff about the Jumbo-Visma guys questioning Tadej Pogačar's performance on that final time trial, which, is kind of, when you're controlling it and you get to set the narrative, I mean, it's slightly unfair. So it's kind of, I felt at least a bit of retribution there.
And back then, Phillipson was on Pogačar's team.
Ah, great point. But yeah, because at the time, that attack with Wout van Aert going off the front in the yellow jersey was absolutely audacious, and the manner in which he held all those sprint teams off was absolutely outrageous, and like dropped Vingegaard and Pogačar and everyone. And it was also off the back, 'cause it was so early in the Tour, it was off the back of the Tour the year before, where he won the Ventoux stage, won a sprint stage, and won a time trial.
He'd also come second in every stage, so up till then.
Yeah.
So he was fueled by passion and anger.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it was good to include. I think because that's definitely a theme and an angle and a narrative that was discussed, and we'll probably get into it in later episodes how this all culminates as we approach Paris. But I think it was good to highlight how exceptional those performances were, and that there were people being like, this is outrageous, and beyond what people thought is possible.
Yeah, that one of the explanations for Phillipson thinking nobody was up the road is that nobody could possibly be up the road, right? Like that which, you kind of buy, right? Like, there's a charging peloton. Like, how on earth could anyone stay solo? But he managed to. Well, that brings us kind of nicely to Wout van Aert and the conflict that is portrayed within the show, particularly in this episode, also a bit in, what was it, episode 4, and that conflict is basically this tension between Wout van Aert wanting to win stages and kind of riding for himself, and also needing to work as a helper, a domestique for Jonas Vingegaard, either in the yellow jersey or trying to get the yellow jersey, right? That's the fundamental tension. And I think that the producers of this show have kind of identified that as a potential source of drama. And the question is, was there any real drama? Was it, kind of played up? And we have a bit of an answer from Wout van Aert himself. He actually spoke to media this week. And, well, who dropped the quote in here? We can read the quote out from him. Abby, what does he say about his portrayal in this show?
He says, I was finally able to watch because, strange but true, although I play one of the leading roles, I did not know what would be seen. It is quite disturbing that stories were written in the documentary that are not there. For me, the series is focused on commotion. Jonas and I are best friends. The focus is on moments in which it is difficult to make the right decision, but there are also so many moments in which we have strengthened each other and worked together. It is a pity that that has been removed.
What are our thoughts on this? Is it overdone?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Is it necessary for the show?
Well, I mean, they were trying to stir up commotion, and they had, when you introduce an episode with the word disaster over and over and over and over and over again, you have to find another example of it in order to have a mirror to the Phillipson storyline. So, in a sport which is so team-based, and at least to the outside world, it's really, really, really emphasised that we're all working together. there are always going to be conflicts within teams and different personalities clashing. But yeah, the most obvious one is probably the Van Aert Vingegaard one, because Van Aert wins stages, Vingegaard wins stages. Before it would have been, I don't know, a Cav Wiggins setup. It's when you've got those two prolific champions in a team, you can, there's an obvious storyline waiting to be told. But yeah, I mean, it was so dialed up, I think. And when they made such a thing of him not waiting for Vingegaard when he crashed towards the end of the stage, I might have cursed at the TV, because you could still see the convoy right there, and Vingegaard was getting back on his bike, so they were maybe 30 seconds off the back, and he had a bunch of teammates already. So for that reason, and for a few others, for people who know what they're looking at when you look at the race footage, it was very clear that this was all a bit exaggerated, more than a bit exaggerated, I think.
I'll play devil's advocate slightly and say that Wout van Aert, he's already won all the stages he could, and he's got the green jersey, and it's all gonna work out. But he, for some reason, he just needs this extra stage to Carcassonne, and you saw it on the team bus beforehand, where he's like, it's like silence, like, well, I'd quite like to go for the stage, and everyone's
the word
just like,
actually.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, what is wrong with you? Like, come on, like, have we not got enough here? Like, at this point, we're just tempting fate if we're gonna keep on, going for it like this. And does he really need to do that? And even if there are other teammates behind, it's like, surely if Jumbo-Visma especially is so desperate to win the Tour de France, and at the time still you're like, is Pogačar gonna manage to get back on terms, and they finally got the yellow jersey back on their shoulders? Surely you do everything possible that even if it's the whole team is there, you drop back just in case, because you're also the strongest rider in the race.
So my thoughts on this are basically that the things that they show did happen, right? And the source of the over dramatization is essentially what Wout says in that quote, which is that they didn't show a lot of the other side. So when we saw this exact same thing happen in stage 5 in the Roubaix cobble stage, we saw it essentially we saw it resolved by the end of the episode, and the resolving of it was the fact that Wout did eventually wait and basically saved Jonas Vingegaard's race, right? Went back, dragged the entire peloton back up. And what did he end up losing? He ended up losing 13 seconds or something like that. That was relatively minor, when it could have been sort of a minute plus. Now, at the time, we didn't know that the Grenon stage was going to happen, that he's going to take minutes anyway. That would have felt like a race-ending moment without Wout van Aert's efforts. So we saw that exact same conflict set up in that episode, and then resolved within the exact same episode, right? And I think that in this one, what did kind of bother me was that essentially it's set up and then not resolved. It's left kind of unresolved because it's left with Wout van Aert not deciding to go back. But I will absolutely maintain that unless Van Aert is acting in that scene in the bus where he's like, actually, I would like to do this, he's still asking to not do what the rest of the team wants to do, right? He is still doing that. And I just because it was resolved internally and it ended up working out just fine, I don't think it's really relevant to whether that thing actually happened. There's no question that there is a fundamental tension between what those two riders want to happen and what they need to happen. And just because it ended up being resolved doesn't mean that the sort of the core of the drama wasn't there. I think what the show was missing was the fact that it was resolved, was the fact that nobody came away from that pissed, and that's what they didn't show. But sort of the initial sort of the kernel of initial drama that still existed. That moment still happened on the bus. You still had Christian Neerman being kind of awkward about it. And they just didn't resolve it at the end, which I think is that's the over dramatization for me.
But that was editing. It's Wout van Aert, and it was a relatively chill, or was on paper a relatively chill stage. If it hadn't been for multiple crashes, then it would have been a pretty straightforward stage. And that was before the stage. There was no way they were going to know that Jonas was going to go down on that stage. Wout putting his hand up to potentially win the stage is totally legit from a rider who could potentially win the stage. And when you're a rider on a team like that, and you feel good, you have good legs, you need to be able to put your hand up and say, look, I think I can go for this stage. Guys are doing that on every single bus, regardless of what the team's ambition is. That happens in every single team meeting. There's always somebody who's like, I feel really good today. I would like to go for the win today. And that's like not out of the ordinary at all, and totally played into the whole like Wout is the villain story perfectly for Netflix, but is absolutely like unfounded in whatever kind of like malicious thing that they're trying to spin.
I don't think it felt particularly malicious though. I think that's
I think that the way that they edited the responses were meant to make it seem malicious. Like the way that they edited like Jonas from the side, like where you couldn't actually see his facial expression at all, but the way that they had the camera like made it seem ominous, and it was probably a shot from like a completely different day on the bus, but
3 days later.
it fit perfectly into that moment. Like
the villain thing felt more malicious in the previous Jumbo episode, in the Roubaix episode to me. In this one, it just felt like this. It's like I said, absolutely an attempt to make it seem like there was probably drama where there wasn't drama. But at the same time, if you've got a rider who has basically said, I don't want to follow the yellow jersey around all day, probably valid from him, that's still like the whole team is not rallying around the yellow jersey, which is in theory what you would end up with, like, for example, with a Team Sky in 2014. They don't bring a sprinter, right? There's nobody on that bus that's like, I would like to go for a stage win today. That's not happening. So I don't know. I struggle with like completely pushing aside the fact that they used that. I think that was fine. I think that they just didn't resolve it. Like they left it by leaving it kind of open-ended at the end, doing all the cuts around the crash and Wout van Aert not coming back and all the rest of that stuff. That's the part that feels disingenuous to me. The actual bit on the bus only feels disingenuous because they didn't resolve it for me. Because that what happened in the bus is what happened in the bus, and you've got a guy who's like, I would like to do my own thing, and the team leader who says, I would like you to not do that, and that actually happened, but again, didn't get resolved, and that's the kind of weird part.
The race lead at that point was 2 minutes 22 seconds. So I don't know. I know you can lose that in one day. Obviously, I don't know. I think, the context is what's lacking here, and that's, I think, something that runs through the whole episode. Because he could have gone off. He could have even if Vingegaard had needed a bike change or several bike changes like he did on stage, whatever it was, 5, at risk of losing more than 30 seconds. Then I don't know. It's just that there was, it's like you said, like we've said over and over again, there was too much. There was a lot of information missing from this episode.
I think the one counterpoint is that Jumbo-Visma are probably just terrified of Tadej Pogacar at all times and just like worried about what he could do in any circumstance. I also think the one thing that will make like Wout van Aert less angry and the reaction to the whole way it's portrayed less sort of crazy is that everyone's it seems like if you're sort of aware of Drive to Survive, you're already aware that they do ham things up for dramatic effect because they're making a TV show, whereas if Drive to Survive didn't exist and we're watching this without any of that context, then you would be like, wow, Jumbo-Visma, what's going on there? But you kind of do know in the back of your mind that when sort of like looks to camera or like huffs are cut in, you're like, okay, that's just to help tell the story,
It's very good news for Jumbo-Visma for this year, though, because an angry Wout van Aert is clearly a very useful one.
How is this? So here's a question: do we know how the show's been received in like Denmark? Like, are Vingegaard fans pissed off at Wout van Aert? Because I guess my fundamental thing is, like, I didn't come out of this episode feeling like Wout van Aert was that villainous. He was way more villainous in the earlier episode, and so I don't think, like, for it to be over dramatized, I would have to come away being like, oh man, that was the bad guy. But he didn't really in this one. Like, he just sort of came across as a guy who wants to win.
Yeah, he's just keen
and asked to do so. Yeah, he's just really keen, and so I didn't feel. It just didn't feel that over dramatized to me. It just felt like a guy who was basically willing to, to increase the chance of losing the yellow jersey by 0.25% so that he could take his chance to win a stage. Like, that, he was willing to do that, to make that swap.
But I don't think he's upset with being cast as a villain. I think he's upset with being shown as a bad teammate, which in cycling is the same thing as putting like a black spot on your hand for Davy Jones' locker. I don't know. That was a weird reference.
Oh wow.
Like, being a bad teammate in cycling is like, you can get labeled as a bad teammate and that will follow you for your entire career. And I don't think that Wout is like, oh man, they made me like a cartoon villain. I think he's like, they showed me as a bad teammate and that is not true. And that is why I'm upset. And I think, like, to Johnny's point, there are a lot of people watching this show that know that it's a TV show, and there are a lot of cuts that have been made that are fabricated or like cut from different things to make something seem more dramatic. But a lot of people who watch the show don't think that. They think that these people are literally just like as they're cast on screen. As I have been given a talking to from Ronan McLaughlin about my opinion of Christian Horner. So, like, there are definitely people who are watching this show and they're like, wow, Wout is a really shitty teammate. Why would he do that to this cute kid from Denmark, Jonas Vingegaard, who's like such an underdog? And that's just like totally false. Like, he's one of the best teammates, one of the most selfless guys in the peloton. And so I totally see why he's pissed off about the show and how it's portrayed him.
I guess that's my point, is that the issue is that it wasn't resolved. The issue is they kick off this narrative that he's a villain, and then they don't fix it, which is what they did in the previous episode. In the previous episode, they kick off the exact same narrative, and they fix it by the end of the episode. They say, actually, he took this amazing giant pull, and he saved Jonas Vingegaard's entire race, right? And granted, maybe there's just nothing in that stage for them to use as that example, but that was the disingenuous part for me, was that they set up this thing and then they didn't fix it at the end, because the thing was still set up. Like, I still maintain that, like, he still said the damn thing on the bus. So, like, what you end up with is you don't have the full story of him doing a million other things throughout that race to make sure that Jonas Vingegaard stayed in yellow, and then you just end up with just this one little nugget. So it's less about it's like I guess it's sort of two halves of the same coin here. It's over dramatization, basically, via like lying by omission, right? Like, nothing was said in there that didn't actually happen. They just didn't say a lot of other things that would have provided some necessary context. That's my issue with this episode.
Yeah, I think the early part of the episode with the Alpecin portion does Van Aert no favours either, because you've got this constructed narrative, and yes, it's based on elements of truth, but there are things about the selection process at Alpecin, with Philipsen not being equipped to win stages when clearly he is, and the use of Van der Poel at all when the emphasis on Van der Poel at all. So it just felt like there was a lot of race footage that they used to tell a story that was a little bit more contrived than any we've seen yet. And I'm not saying it wasn't there. It's just that it was slightly more far-fetched for somebody who knows what was happening and who can tell what's happening in the race footage. Even when, they were talking about the GC teams blocking the sprint teams from catching the two-man breakaway into Carcassonne, and then suddenly they're still talking about sprint teams picking up the pace, but it's still Ineos on the front, and it's just like these clips make no sense, and so it was just a whole episode of slightly grasping at straws a little bit, which in the end made everyone come off looking a little bit iffy.
Is this the most kind of the furthest from actual reality episode that we've had thus far.
Yeah.
It's just the most bullshit episode we've had thus far.
I think it's the hardest to watch. It's the least tailored to, or the least expert friendly one, the least fan friendly episode. People who knew what was going on, and yeah, it's got a lot to get your teeth into. Obviously, with the Phillipson being a character, but I think for so much of it, I was just going, "Hang on, that doesn't fit." And so I think maybe this one would be one where non-cycling fans could get excited when everyone else is raising their eyebrows.
Still better than episode 1, though, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. So episode 1's still probably the most, like, making something out of literally absolutely nothing. And this is probably a close second for me.
The moment that they showed the finish, though, and it was like Jasper Philipsen, Mess, and Wout sprinting against each other, and it was in like slow-mo, and the music was just like...
Yeah, it was great.
Perfection. That was the only point in this episode, other than like Jasper Philipsen just being like super relatable, that I was like, okay, this is great still. But other than that, it's just like the whole episode just had me going...
Can we talk a little bit about Jonas Vingegaard on the radio?
Oh man, he lost his cool.
He always needs a bike.
Yeah.
Always needs a bike.
If there was a like a Jonas Vingegaard action figure where you like pulled a string in the back or press the button, that would be like the catchphrase. It'd be number one, I love my wife, and then number 2, I need a bike.
10 years ago, they'd have been selling it as an SMS notification.
Yeah. That would be great.
Johnny, you have to provide context for the I love my wife part, because if you just watch this TV show, you have no idea what you're talking about.
We got hints of it, I think, in one of the episodes, but basically during the race, like every day, the yellow jersey has to do a press conference, and so if a rider's in the jersey for a number of days and nothing's really happening, then you kind of run out of questions, and so maybe you just try and delve a bit more into who they are and get to know them, especially with a new rider on the scene at that level. So you'd kind of be trying to delve into Jonas Vingegaard's personality, and it turns out that no matter what question you ask, like the most banal thing about like what you have for breakfast or what TV shows he likes, he'd always just be like, I just like spending time with my family, and I love my wife and I love my kid. And then also after every stage he'd be warming down on the rollers and he'd be on the phone to his wife just chatting, I guess, about anything. And he's just a big wife guy. And it's surprising as well, because he'd be on the phone to his wife a lot, but then she was on the race for a lot of it as well. So I mean, maybe this is just speaking volumes about how I view relationships. But that seems like a lot of talking to when all he's been doing all day is like racing a bike.
But we had Geraint Thomas's wife say that she doesn't watch the races; she just waits for the phone call, the text after the stage. So maybe he's literally just saying, "It's all right, I'm alive. I made it to the finish."
I have a screenshot of the Paris-Roubaix episode, or the Paris-Roubaix stage, that just is Tom's writing me, "Don't worry, I'm alive."
Oh.
Beyond the I love my wife line, I do those radio calls that they've included in this episode, I think were interesting in that he does not sound like a cool, calm, collected, old hand GC guy, right? Like you can tell that this is his first go at this, right? And if Geraint Thomas had the same thing happen to him, it would not sound the same on the radio, right? There might be more swearing, but it wouldn't sound quite so panicked, I don't think. And I did find that interesting, and I one of the reasons why it's so hard to win lots of Tours de France is that there are so many things that can go wrong, and sort of dealing with those things that go wrong is a big part of what makes big champions, right? And that made me wonder whether he's going to run into problems on that front, regardless of his physical abilities over the next couple of years, because his reaction to chaos was not always the most doubt. Or maybe he'll figure it out, because that was, like I said, it was his first go at it.
Do we know that I Need a Bike was from this same stage, though?
Oh yeah, who knows?
No.
The only other thing though is that like when he said like I need a bike, it like the only thing it reminded me of was like if you wake up in the middle of the night after having a dream that you're like you've overslept for an exam, like at school, and so like he'd suddenly woken up and was like in the middle of the Tour de France without a bike. Like it was that level of panic, which I think was like that kind of mirrored the Jasper Philipsen sort of what was it again? Chuckle self-consciously. Like it was just like the brackets would have said sheer terror.
I received a text as we're recording this podcast from a rider on Trek Segafredo, the American team that is not one of the teams featured in this series. He wants me to know that he is watching episode 2. How did Wout get into yellow? I'm confused.
Weirdly, that's exactly the same question that my girlfriend asked me, who has no idea about cycling. So it's good to know that both ends of the spectrum have exactly the same questions about.
And he was in the race, and he's confused.
Yeah, he was in the race. He doesn't know.
Didn't your girlfriend? Was it your girlfriend who said that Wout was the Pixar villain? Was that somebody else?
Yeah, that was the first impression, was that he looks like a Pixar villain.
It's the Incredible. He has Incredibles hair.
With the hair.
Yeah, but
With
then
like
that guy was ginger. Anyway, we're getting too far into it. But
we should actually point out that the little blonde streak in Wout's hair is not dyed.
It's like a birthmark thing.
Yeah.
She also did say that he's got too much hair. So then, but then maybe Wout van Aert should go ride for Alpecin de Koning, because too much hair seems like a.
Maybe he's got a personal sponsor.
Yeah.
Man, if Wout and Mathieu van der Poel were teammates, that would be terrible.
Imagine the Netflix series.
That's
you
what
get out of
Ineos
that.
would do.
All right. So we've been ending these episodes by asking the question, sort of what was missed, what was not included that we saw that we think was important. What qualifies this time?
How hot it was. Like it was in that period of summer where I think it was most of Western Europe, where it was like a huge heat wave, and the race was in Carcassonne and like that sort of south bit of France that is just always hot anyway. And it was so hot that I remember one morning, it might have been that Carcassonne stage actually, where I was trying to interview Owen Dool, and he was just so hot that he was like, sorry, I just can't do this. Like I can't think straight because it's so hot, and I just need to try and cool down before riding 200 kilometers. And like some of the riders, like the teams were making them slushies, because our colleague Josh Robinson wrote a really good article about how it was important. You guys wouldn't be able to actually explain the process better. It was about the effects of cooling the body, which the slushies did better than just like having ice on your neck. Yeah, it was hot. It was super, super hot.
And we went for a swim in the river that did not make it into the show.
Yeah, right. That was they didn't show us playing cricket with like the EF mechanics and drivers and soigneurs, and they haven't shown me, you, and Ian with our tops off swimming in the river.
Which we know they have footage of.
Yeah, but the
camera was pointed at us.
It was. I imagine it was such a ghastly image that it was not suitable for broadcast.
It was very hot. I mean, there's so many little details of the Tour de France that are left out, and yeah, I know that probably the majority of folks listening to this, you're already a Tour de France fan. You probably already listened to a fair number of our podcasts. But if you are not, if you are new, listen to the Tour dailies that we do. We do an episode every single stage. Head over to escapecollective.com. You'll find them there, or the Escape Collective podcast channel. And yeah, that's where we get into all the little stuff, right? We got an episode every single day, bringing you kind of behind the scenes at the Tour. I can't wait to make those. They're super fun to make. But that is, I think, the best way that we can kind of bring the Tour de France to your ears.
Especially if you like the sort of nuggets where it's Mathieu van der Poel eating sushi outside a locked hotel room, or Jasper Philipsen chuckling self-consciously. That's kind of like what we aim for. That's like our coverage. So if you like that, we do all the normal stuff, but we also do a lot of that stuff too.
Lots of self-conscious chuckling. All right. I think that's it from us for this episode. Again, that was episode 6. We will be back chatting about episode 7 here pretty soon. Episode 7, everything for the podium. We're getting near the end. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Check back in the next episode of the Unchained Binge Podcast. Bye-bye. Hey, Kaylee Fretz from Escape Collective here. If you've landed on this podcast because you just watched Unchained on Netflix and you want to dive headfirst into the Tour de France and pro bike racing, I have some great news for you. The crew behind this podcast cover pro cycling in depth 365 days a year over at escapecollective.com. We're member funded, meaning listeners and readers support what we do. So if you love this pod, head over to escapecollective.com/join to sign up. Get all kinds of extra stuff. You get past the paywall. You get the best bike content anywhere. Thanks.